Whenever you say so,
Yeah.
please start.
Good evening, one and all, and we welcome you all on the live Facebook as well as on this platform to the part 2 of the master class on the Court Fees and Suit Valuation Act. And those who are not connected with us on the WhatsApp group, we can share with you the sub-agendas which the learned speaker, the resource person, Mr. Subramaniam Srivastava, a senior advocate of Karnataka High Court, has agreed to share his knowledge on this topic. Those who had been connected with us yesterday know that yesterday's session was very well received, not only on the Facebook, but also on the YouTube channel of Beyond Law CLC, which we had uploaded the video today morning itself. And wherein people are actually latching it up, it shows that the way Mr. Subramaniam had placed the things, they were understood by one and all, and is appreciated not only by the lawyers, university students, as well as judicial officers. Like yesterday, we had Vani Goda, who specifically stated therein that there should be specific reference to the Karnataka court fees. Therefore, while creating the sub-agenda, Mr. Subramaniam had been kind enough, though we would be having audience pan India, but he would be, yes, definitely giving more reference to the Karnataka fees, etc. The sub-agenda would be the multifarious suits of the court fees, market values arrived at by a legal fiction, suits for declaration, suits for cancellation of decrees and documents, suits for partition. And then he says the lecture will cover court fees in Karnataka and other states and union territory to give the lecture a pan-Indian flavor. As they say that the flavor may anything, but the cinnamon would be the Karnataka. So therefore, it will have its own flavor while taking it. As they say that you can take the man out of that, but you cannot take the basic root values wherein he comes from Karnataka. Therefore, on popular demand, since the audience would be also on the platform from Karnataka, and taking into consideration that the Karnataka Superior Judiciary is also having examination. Without taking much time, I would request Sir to say, as I just wished it was just like a serial, wherein we say that a recap and then move forward. So in that way, we can tell Sir to 5 minutes to give a recap to the audience who have been connected for the first time, and then we move ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Vikas. Before I start today's lecture, I would like to take this opportunity to wish Vikas a very happy birthday. May you have a wonderful year ahead, and what a wonderful job you're doing. May the good Lord shower all his blessings on you.
Thank you, sir. Once we have blessings of the elders, one always well. But I always wonder the way you said that, may the good God, because I always felt that God has always been good. And I'm just reminded the same way that people used to say, you can't have the cake and eat it too. To one of the judges, I said that if there is a cake and if you can't eat it, then there's no fun of having that cake. Right, sir. Over to you.
Right. Now, yesterday, it was rather historical to a large extent, in which I told you about the Court Fees Act 1870, of how states are entitled to make their own laws regarding court fee, how the Central Act, the Parliament can legislate the Court Fees Act 1870 and make the court fees applicable for Supreme Court. Supreme Court makes its own rules. I also gave you a list of states where Court Fees Acts have been executed. I told you of union territories where the 1870 Act is used. I told you about states where the 1870 Act is still used with modifications. I told you about Pondicherry, where the president can't make a law unless the legislative assembly is not in session, and they have made their own laws. Bengal was following the Court Fees Act with amendments, and in 1970, West Bengal created its own Court Fees Act. And in the process, I went through sections of the Court Fees Act 1870, Section 7, Section 8, Section 12, I gave you case laws. Today, it would be more, what I will say, I have about 75 case laws pan-India. Supreme Court, Karnataka, Madras, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Punjab, Calcutta, and I will try and cover the important subjects which happen in our daily lives as lawyers, trial lawyers. I will focus on multifarious suits. I will focus on court fee, where the valuation of market value is done by legal fiction for agricultural lands, suits for declaration, suits for cancellation of decrees, suits for cancellation of documents, partition suits, and the court fee payable on these suits. Considering the number of states and union territories, it would not really be possible to cover all of them individually. But as I have seen, the Court Fees Act 1870, the adaptations in various states, and the Court Fees Acts in various states, I find that the basic structure is the same. All the governments are trying to collect as much money under as many different heads of civil litigation as possible. And therefore, there is a common thread of commonality of thought in the matter of collection of court fee. And therefore, whether I'm in Karnataka or in Delhi or elsewhere, certain basic principles are the same and judgments across the board can be used. Of course, somebody in Punjab and Haryana may say that the High Court of Karnataka has only persuasive value, but it's okay. If I don't have anything and if I have something of persuasive value, that's better than nothing. I also had a request that some people are writing the district judges exam. They would like to have focus on the Karnataka Court Fees and Suits Valuation Act. I've not really gone saying only Karnataka, but I have integrated Karnataka and other states so that the people from Karnataka get a clear picture of what's happening in their state, and the people from other states also realize how similar the laws are all over the country. Now, with respect to, we start with multifarious suits. Section 6 of the Karnataka Court Fees and Suits Valuation Act deals with court fees payable on multifarious suits. The term multifarious suits embraces two or more distinct subjects under separate causes of action, which might or might not have been made the subject matter of separate suits. Now we have sections 6, subsection 1 and subsection 2. They relate to reliefs based on the same cause of action. And actually these two subsections give statutory recognition to the previous practice, which was based on judicial opinion. Section 6.1 presupposes that in respect of two distinct subjects, at this point, those from Karnataka would do well to pick up the Karnataka Court Fees and Suits Valuation Act and read the subsections as I mentioned them. It will help them. Section 6, subsection 1 presupposes that in respect of two distinct subjects, two separate suits could be filed on the assumption that court fee payable on the consolidated plaint is the aggregate court fee payable. That is the total of the court fee payable separately on each of the two plaints. Obviously, there cannot be two suits in respect of the same cause of action, except on the special circumstances prescribed by the Code of Civil Procedure. That is for some other time. It is therefore apparent that there must be two distinct causes of action for the application of section 6.1. Now, Order 2, Rule 3 of the Code of Civil Procedure permits a plaintiff to unite in the same suit several causes of action against the same defendant. Order 2, Rule 6 of the CPC empowers the court to order separate trials. This also implies that Section 6.1 of the Court Fees Act applies to cases where there are two causes of action and are clubbed together in one suit, and therefore it also expressly saves the power of the court to order separate trials under Order 2, Rule 6. if you see the provisions of the CPC, a scrutiny of the provisions of the CPC enabling joinder of parties, causes of action in one suit would afford a clue to the purpose behind section 6.1. Orders 1 and 2 of the Code of Civil Procedure provide for joinder of parties and causes of action. But there is no indication in the Code of Civil Procedure that the legislature intended that the government should forego court fee if the plaintiff took advantage of this enabling provision of combining two causes of action in one suit. Also, there is no reason why the court fee should be reduced or given up by the government when the plaintiff asks for and gets the same relief in one suit instead of filing two suits or more than two suits. Now, as you all know, there is no definition in the Code of Civil Procedure for the term cause of action. But it is the fundamental pivot around which most of the provisions of the Code of Civil Procedure revolve. It is the basis for the maintainability of the suit. It's fairly well settled that cause of action means the bundle of essential facts which is necessary for the plaintiff to prove before he can succeed. This connotes the right to sue and the cause of action. The term cause of action are synonymous, mean the same thing. In Nagamulli, Narayanamurthy versus G. Gangaraju, AR 1958, Andhra Pradesh 451, this explanation has been given very nicely. AR 1958, Andhra Pradesh 451. Now, where the plaintiff seeks two or more substantive reliefs based on the same cause of action, the reliefs, each of these substantive reliefs should be separately valued under the appropriate provisions of the Court Fees Act. Court fee is to be calculated on the total value of the reliefs asked for by the plaintiff. This is the law as laid down by the Allahabad High Court in Vishnu Sahai versus Bhagbari, reported in AR 1949, Allahabad 117. Now, in a suit, apart from the substantial relief, there are ancillary and incidental relief which must necessarily follow the grant of the substantive relief, and in such cases, these ancillary or incidental reliefs need not be valued for court fee. Like you generally say, consequential relief, incidental relief, no court fee. Where a plaintiff seeks one or two reliefs in the alternative, give me this or that, both are based on the same cause of action. The rule is that court fee is payable on the relief which carries the higher fee. If there are two reliefs asked in the alternative, court fee is payable on the higher relief, irrespective of the fact that the relief which carries the lesser fee is more valuable to the plaintiff. This was the law laid down by the Mysore High Court in Subra Bhai versus State of Mysore, reported in 1970, first volume, Mysore Law Journal, page 91. 1970, first volume, Mysore Law Journal, page 91. If a single relief is asked for on one or the other of two distinct causes of action, different court fees are not payable for the different causes of action. For example, a suit claiming money from either the principal borrower or the guarantor is a suit consisting of a single relief and based on a single cause of action within the meaning of the explanation to Order 2 of the Code of Civil Procedure. Therefore, only one court fee is payable. Section 6.3 provides that where a suit embraces two or more distinct and different causes of action, suit embraces two or more distinct and different causes of action, and separate reliefs are sought, the plaintiff will be chargeable to duty on the aggregate amount of the fees payable if separate suits were filed. Now, this is under the Karnataka Court Fees Act. This is also the rule under the Court Fees Act of 1870, which means that many states which are following the 1870 Act with or without modifications also follow this rule. In view of the interpretation of the words distinct subjects in section 17 of the 1870 Act by a full bench of the Madras High Court, in the case of Lakshmi Narayan Chettiar, reported in AR 1954 Madras 594, AR 1954 Madras 594, two court fees are payable. Now, section 6.3 will also apply to cases where causes of action are combined under the mandatory provisions of section 67 capital A of the Transfer of Property Act relating to several mortgages. 67A of the Transfer of Property Act. In such cases, 6.3 applies. Now, in a suit for declaration of different transactions in respect of different parties at different times as void and for injunction, the plaintiff has to value each item and pay court fee. Now, in the Calcutta High Court, in a case Haru Bepari versus Roy Shitish Bhushan Roy Bahadur, reported in AR 1935 Calcutta 573, a division bench of the Calcutta High Court was dealing with a case in which 73 people filed a suit for declaration against a single defendant with regard to the right of each plaintiff to one plot out of the total 73. The division bench of the Calcutta High Court held that this suit consisted of 73 distinct subjects and court fee had to be paid on each subject separately. Now, 1935, Calcutta was following the Court Fees Act 1870. It has its own Court Fees Act from 1970. Now, there are some exceptions to this 6.3 rule. The rule contained in section 6.3 is not applicable to co-heirs of a deceased seeking to assert the right of their predecessor. That, for example, the heirs of a deceased partner have been held to have a single cause of action against the surviving partner for accounts. Two partners, one partner dies, his heirs have a single cause of action against the surviving partners. Doesn't matter the number of heirs. This was the law laid down by the Madras High Court in S.K. Muhammad Ibrahim versus Vedachala Mudaliar, reported in AR 1959 Madras 387. Then the Punjab High Court has held in Kaushik versus Graduate Gas Service 1978, Volume 80, Punjab Law Reports 182. 1978, Volume 80, Punjab Law Reports 182. In a suit for damages by different persons in the family as a result of a fire caused by mishandling of a gas cylinder arises from a single cause of action. Now, why I'm giving you this is various fact situations arise and each has to be analyzed differently, thought out and court fee paid. The Supreme Court in Shamsher Singh versus Rajendra Prasad reported in AR 1973 Supreme Court 2384. AR 1973 Supreme Court 2384 held that the court, in deciding the question of court fee, should look into the allegations in the plaint to see what is the substantive relief which is asked for. Cleverness in drafting the plaint will not be allowed to stand in the way of the court looking at the substance of the relief. The Supreme Court again in Fakir Chand versus Harman Kaur, AR 1967 Supreme Court 727, AR 1967 Supreme Court 727 observed that where the plaintiffs sued for declaration that the decree obtained by the appellant against their father was not binding on them, the Supreme Court said they were actually asking for setting aside the decree or for the consequential relief of injunction, restraining the decree holder from executing the decree as he was entitled to do. So the court went into the substance of the relief and said, listen, the relief asked for is something else. This aspect of the matter was brought out in a decision of the full bench of the Lahore High Court in Zebul Nisa versus Deen Muhammad, AR 1941, Lahore 97, a full bench judgment, AR 1941, Lahore 97, where it was held that the mere fact that the relief as stated in the prayer column is expressed in a declaratory form, it does not necessarily show that the suit is for a mere declaration and no more. The court can go into the substance of the plaint and the relief sought for and arrive at a conclusion. Now, I would like you, my friends, to see a few illustrative cases of cumulative reliefs which were held to be distinct subjects. Cumulative reliefs held to be distinct subjects. 1. A suit on several promissory notes or bonds were held to be distinct subjects. In AK Bajaj versus Nandi Trading Company, AR 1985 Calcutta 202, AR 1985 Calcutta 202, Bommarase Gowda BT Gundappa, AR 1954 Karnataka 121, AR 1954 Karnataka 121, and Secretary of State versus Ayyaswamy Chettiar, AR 1933 Madras 178. So if you see, 55 years, the same legal principle has been reiterated across the country. The next example would be a suit to recover money due under several policies, different subjects. It was held to be different subjects. In Sripati versus LIC of India, AR 1962 Andhra Pradesh 63, AR 1962 Andhra Pradesh 63. The third example, where two mortgages were executed on the same day for balance of the purchase price for the land sold by the plaintiff, a suit on the two mortgage bonds was held to embrace a single subject. Now, with this judgment, this is in Hakim Meher Deen versus Kul Tilak Ram, AR 1943 Lahore 275. This will clearly bring out the distinction of distinct subjects. A suit by reversioners against different trespassers in occupation of different properties was held by the Allahabad High Court to comprise of distinct subjects. This is the judgment rendered by the Allahabad High Court in Ramachandra Lodha versus Tejabai, AR 1966, Allahabad 522. Now, suit for an aggregate amount made up of an overpayment and to items of losses sustained by the plaintiff on account of breach of contract. So therefore, suit is filed to recover some excess amount paid. Suit is filed to recover an item recover some money on account of breach of contract. So two items of overpayment, one item of loss on account of breach was held to consist of three distinct subjects. In CP Syndicate versus Sardar Naurang Singh, AR 1950 Nagpur 189. Now all these judgments I've cited so far apply across the board to Karnataka or any other state as far as the concept of distinct subjects is concerned. in the context of court fee for multifarious suits. Now, where separate orders were placed by the collector, collector is a term used in the presidency terms. We use the word deputy commissioner in Karnataka. Collector and deputy commissioner are the same administratively. Where separate orders were placed by the collector for supply of wheat to 4 districts. A suit based on the 4 orders comprises 4 distinct causes of action. The mere fact that the plaintiff had given one notice under section 80 will not make it one transaction. This was the decision of the Madras High Court reported in AR 1957 Madras 163. AR 1957 Madras 163. The 7th one, a suit for declaration that the alienation in favor of different defendants are not binding on the plaintiff is a suit where there is a separate cause of action against each of the alienees. This judgment can be found in 1972 2 Mysore Law Journal 318. Same decision, AR 1954 Madras 594. AR 1954 Madras 594. AR 1966 Allahabad 522. AR 1966 Allahabad 522. A suit, next one is 8th one, a suit for declaration regarding an adoption and 2 wills, though relating to the same property, was considered to be for distinct subjects. AIR 1931 Madras 712. AR 1931 Madras 712. A suit for recovery of deposits made on different dates, distinct subjects. AR 1931 Madras 712. AR 1931 Madras 712. 10th one, a suit by one co-sharer, landlord, for his share of the rent, in which another co-sharer seeks to join as a plaintiff and claim his share of the rent also, is distinct subjects, separate court fees. AR 1943 Patna 356. Now, when I file a suit for ejectment and for arrears of rent, I have to pay court fee for ejectment in Karnataka on the average annual rent, and for arrears on the amount of arrears. So a suit for ejectment of a tenant and for arrears of rent comprises 2 different subjects. This was also the view taken by the Andhra Pradesh High Court in AR 1956 Andhra Pradesh 842. Now, some of you may be wondering why I have been citing such old judgments. In these judgments, the propositions of law are set out very clearly, and it helps us understand the basis of the decision. And these decisions continue to be in force and good law even today. Now, the next set of cases are where cumulative reliefs have been held not to be different subjects. So far, we saw 11 examples of different subjects, distinct subjects. Now, we will consider some examples of not distinct subjects. Suits for rents or profits for several years arising out of the same property are held not to be distinct subjects. This is made clear by reason of the explanation to Order 2, Rule 2, CPC. A suit against a number of tenants for a declaration that they have no occupancy rights in the lands on the allegation that they joined hands and have conspired to deny the plaintiff's title was held not to be different subjects. 1958, second volume, Madras Law Journal 412. 1958, second volume, Madras Law Journal 412. A suit to recover losses in respect of several consignments against the railway company preceded by a single notice was also held not to be different or distinct subjects. EI Railway Company was Ahmadi Khan, AR 1924, Patna 596. A suit for balance of accounts comprising several items but forming one continuous item was held not to be distinct subjects. A suit on a simple mortgage taken by several creditors as security for several debts due to them was also held not to be distinct subjects. AR 1932 Madras 737. AR 1932 Madras 737. Now, a sixth example. Suit by several co-partners for declaration that certain properties were co-partnership property was held to be only one subject and not distinct subjects. 1961 Mysore Law Journal, page 95. 1961 Mysore Law Journal, page 95. Now, section 6(4) of the Karnataka Court Fees Act deals with appeals in multifarious suits. The law which I will now cite, in fact, in Karnataka, we also cite Allahabad High Court judgments. The general principles are the same. The positioning of the sections may be slightly different. The wording may be slightly different. Section 6(4) deals with memoranda of appeals, applications, petitions, and written statement. Somehow, the exact scope of the reference to applications and written statements, to me, doesn't appear to be very clear. Does it mean that a single application containing prayers for more than one relief requires separate court fee? Under the Karnataka Civil Rules of Practice, it says that every application shall ask only for one relief. Now, in this connection, in view of 6(4), and it does not appear to be fully clear even to me, one judgment of the Allahabad High Court would be useful to see. Ram Swaroop versus Gindu, AR 1954 Allahabad 736. AR 1954 Allahabad 736. Now, the next category. There are also a set of cases where alternate reliefs are being asked, which were held to require separate court fees to be paid. Now, on the one hand, we say alternate reliefs. On the other hand, we say separate court fees. What are these examples? Both the Madras and the Andhra Pradesh High Courts, AR 1947 Madras 125, AR 1947 Madras 125, and AR 2008 Andhra Pradesh 42. AR 2008 Andhra Pradesh 42 say, a suit for specific performance of a contract of sale is one relief, or in the alternative, for recovery of amount due on a promissory note, which under the agreement of sale was to be adjusted toward the sale consideration, was held to be a case where alternate reliefs were asked, but separate court fees needed to be paid on each of the alternate reliefs. One for specific performance, the next for the amount due on the promissory note. The second example is a decision by the Nagpur High Court, AR 1924 Nagpur 169. In that case, a suit by a purchaser of immovable property for possession from a third person who was in possession. I buy a property from somebody, it's in possession of somebody else. A suit by a purchaser of immovable property for possession from a third person who is in possession. Alternate relief for refund of the sale consideration from my vendor. One I am asking for possession from the third party who is in possession. The other I am saying is alternatively let my vendor return my money which I paid. This was held to be a case of alternate reliefs where court fee was payable on each of the alternate reliefs. Now, this is one side of the. There are other cases where the alternate reliefs were held not to be distinct subjects. A suit for specific performance of an agreement to sell or for recovery of an amount due in a mortgage. 1942 Nagpur Law Journal 352. A suit for possession on the ground that the will in favor of the defendant is not genuine, one relief, or in the alternative for maintenance on the ground that the will could not affect the plaintiff's right to proper maintenance. These were held to be alternate reliefs, but not distinct subjects, only one court fee payable. 1939, Volume 1, Madras Law Journal, page 456. 1939, Volume 1, Madras Law Journal, page 456. Now, an important question arises regarding the jurisdiction of courts in cases of multiple reliefs based on distinct cause of action. Where there are several reliefs, none of which exceeds the suit property in value, are sought in the alternative. The value of the suit for the purposes of the jurisdiction is not the aggregate value of the relief sought. Now, this covers multifarious suits. I have given you across the board a wide spectrum of examples which can be read, and from there you can develop your own library of how multifarious suits, court fees should be payable on multifarious suits. Next we come to under the Karnataka Court Fees Act, which is also Section 7 under the Court Fees Act of 1870, and therefore similar provisions in all states and union territories which adopted the 1870 Act. This is also the case under Pondicherry Court Fees Act and other acts. So Section 7 of the Karnataka Court Fees Act expresses a method of valuation which is by and large followed all across the country. Now we come to the determination of market value of lands which pay land revenue. This is a fictional value and is a concession. In Karnataka, this is contained in Section 7. There are provisions for concessional court fees in other states also. In Karnataka, Section 7(1) provides that where fee is payable under the Act and the fee depends on the market value of the property, the value shall be determined as on the date of presentation of the plaint. The procedure for determination is contained in Sections 11 to 19 of the Act. Reference may be made to Sharanappa versus Mallappa, 1976 Mysore Law Journal, Short Notes 288. 1976 Mysore Law Journal, Short Notes 288. On the question of market value, it needs to be clarified that guidelines issued by the government have to be followed. Muhammad Mirajuddin versus Iqbal, 2000, Volume 6, Karnataka Law Journal, 431. The court can see what the real nature of the relief and can demand proper court fee. The Karnataka High Court, in fact, followed the decision of a full bench of the Allahabad High Court in Kaluram versus Babulal, AIR 1932, Allahabad 485, full bench. The decision of the Allahabad, full bench of the Allahabad High Court was followed by the Karnataka High Court in Shivappa Satyappa Mundakanavar versus Satyappa Yellappa Muttappagol in 1971, Volume 1, Mysore Law Journal 374. 1971, Volume 1, Mysore Law Journal 374. You can see here, the first judgment was in 32, 42, 52, 62. 39 years later, that was still good law. And therefore, it is useful to read the earlier judgment of the Allahabad High Court in 1932 and then read the 1971 judgment of the Karnataka High Court. Now, Section 7 of the Karnataka Court Fees Act 1958, as also Section 7 of the Central Court Fees Act of 1870 and other enactments across the country, create a legal fiction regarding the market value of the lands that form an entire estate or a definite share of an estate. This is also the position all over the country where the market value of lands paying land revenue is determined as a multiplier of the land revenue. 15 times, 10 times, 15 times, 25 times, 40 times, various. But we should keep in mind that this concessional valuation under Section 7 is only for court fee and not for jurisdiction. For the purposes of jurisdiction of the court, in Karnataka, we have civil judge junior division, civil judge senior division, district court. High court doesn't have original jurisdiction. For jurisdiction as to which court, you may pay correct court fee, but which court is the case to be filed, the real market value has to be taken. Thus, in a suit in respect of agricultural land, the court fee may be just rupees 25, being a multiplier 25 times of the land revenue. But the market value may be 1 crore, taking the jurisdiction of the court from the lowest court to a higher level. It is therefore possible, by reason of Section 7, not only in Karnataka but elsewhere, to have a value for court fee and a value for jurisdiction. Now, where a suit was agricultural land on the date of suit and was subsequently included within the municipality limits, the court fee payable would be Section 7(2)(b) and 7(2)(d) read with Section 24A. This is with reference to Karnataka. The same logic can be applied in other states where there is provision for a legal fictional value and a separate provision for payment on market value. Now, with reference to the Karnataka Act, let us now see Section 7(2)(a). This provision deals with permanently settled estates. This clause is applicable, where the whole of the estate is the subject matter, where a definite share of the estate is the subject matter, where a specific part of the estate is recorded in the Deputy Commissioner's register as separately assessed with revenue. In other states, you will find the word collector being used. In the absence of such formal apportionment, Clause 7D would apply and not Clause 7A. In a suit for declaration and possession, the suit is governed by Section 24A. In the case of preemption by Section 31, in either case, if it is land which is paying land revenue and falls under Section 7, market value has to be determined in accordance with Section 7. This was the law laid down in Shantabai Baswant Rao versus Manik Rao Panduranga, AR 1969 Madras 255. AR 1969 Madras 255. This judgment applies even to Karnataka. This judgment applies to Andhra Pradesh. This judgment could apply on facts to any other place where there is a question of market value and the property is agricultural land and the relief is declaration. In a suit for appointment of for receipt of possession of land, the land on which arecanut trees are standing cannot be considered as garden falling under 7D. The land having been assessed on a permanent basis falls under Section 7(2)(b), and if that is so, 7(2)(d) cannot apply. For those in Karnataka, this distinction is brought out in Ramachandra Gajanan Hegde versus Ganapati Uma Maheshwar Hegde, AR 1971 Mysore 336, division bench. AR 1971 Mysore 336, which is a division bench judgment. Now, with respect to 7B, temporarily settled estates, a close reading would show that not only should the land be an entire estate or a definite share of an estate, but it must be paying annual revenue to the government. The expression paying annual revenue to the government implies that the liability to pay land revenue must be clear and subsisting one. In case the liability ceases on account of the area being incorporated within a municipal corporation, the land cannot be said to be paying annual revenue to the government. This is the law laid down in J.M. Narayana and others versus Corporation of City of Bangalore. ILR 2005 Karnataka, page 60. ILR 2005 Karnataka, page 60. Now we come to section 7C, dealing with lands wholly or partially exempted from revenue. These fall to be valued at 15 times the net profits that have arisen from them during the year next before the date of presenting the plaint. 15 times the net profits that have arisen from them during the year next before the date presenting the plaint. This means that 365 days recurring backwards from the. I found one judgment for this, 26 Allahabad 411. Or at 30 times the land revenue payable for similar lands in the neighborhood, whichever is lower. Now, where a plaintiff claims that the land is really Inam land and it has wrongly been classified as Rayotwari land, then the plaintiff can value the suit as Rayotwari land under section 7B. Now, what does this term net profit mean? The term net profit means net income or yield after deducting from the gross yield the charges or labor, quit rent, and water rate payable to the government. Now, in a particular year, good monsoon, the bumper crop, if the net profits for any year are exceptional, and I file a suit immediately after 365 days, the valuation under section 72C, I still have to pay on the exceptional value. It doesn't matter if before those 365 days I had suffered a loss. This was the law laid down in 1946, volume 1, Madras Law Journal 190. 1946, volume 1, Madras Law Journal 190. So therefore you see that these concepts of land revenue, multiplier of land revenue, determination of market value, how it is to be determined, are more or less common pan-India. Judgments from other courts can be used to bolster our arguments in our respective states. Now, we come to section 7(2)(d) of the Karnataka Act. This declares that the market value of lands described therein and any land not described therein shall be the market value of lands themselves. Now, what are this? Seems a very confusing definition. What are these lands that are covered by section 7(2)(d)? 1. Any land forming part of an estate paying revenue to the government, but not forming a definite share of such estate and not separately assessed. Any land which is garden. 3. Any land which is a house site, whether assessed to full revenue or not. Any land which does not fall in any other of the categories above. Now, if you read it carefully and again, it appears that the benefit of this fictional basis of determination of market value seems to have been denied to lands in clause D, because there are only specific portions of lands covered and not separately assessed. When both category 1 lands in clause D and lands in clause A to C are agricultural lands, to deny the benefit of fictional basis of determination of market value to the former class merely because they form a smaller portion of assessed survey numbers and they are not separately assessed by themselves, it may amount to a denial of a well-intended benefit And very honestly, this provision does not, to my mind, have any rationale or logic behind it. To my mind, this anomaly may not have been intended by the legislature. Anyhow, it is there on the statute book. We have to follow it. It was held under the 1870 Act, Central Court Fees Act 1870, that a temple has no market value, and a suit for possession of a temple cannot be valued under Section 7(5)(e) of the Court Fees Act 1870. Fixed fee is payable under 17(b) of Schedule 2. Section 27 relating to trust property would apply, as the parties cannot claim a beneficial interest in the temple, and the suit should be valued at 20,000, at rupees 1,000 under 27. Under the Court Fees Act of 1870, which is followed by states like Bihar, Orissa, Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Andaman, Nicobar Islands, with some amendments, there is provision in Section 7(4), similar to Section 7 of the Karnataka Court Fees and Suits Valuation Act, where land which is paying land revenue to the government is treated on a different footing from other urban lands. Under Section 7(4), where a suit is for a right to a share in joint family property, or to enforce a right to a share on the ground that it is joint family property, or for possession of lands, houses, or gardens, it is provided that where the land forms an entire estate or a definite share of an estate, or forms part of an estate and it is so recorded in the collector's register, then the market value is to be computed at 10 times the annual revenue. That is to say, a multiple of the annual revenue. Under the Court Fees Act 1870, the multiplier is 10. Various states which still follow that may have changed the multiplier, but the basic law seems to remain the same. Now, I am of the view that the decisions rendered by the Karnataka High Court, subject to such variations of multiplier, could be used in these states, and the decisions of these states could be used in Karnataka. Now, Schedule 1 to the Karnataka Court Fees and Suits Valuation Act and Schedule 1 to the Court Fees Act 1870 are more or less identical in content because they provide for ad valorem fees, though the percentage will vary from state to state. In Karnataka, there's a gradual reduction in the percentage of court fee payable, depending on the value. And for a claim which is valued at above 80 lakhs, anything above 80 lakhs is court fee is payable at a flat 0.5% of the value. This may not be the case in all the states. There is likely to be variations in the rates. The common thread underlying all the enactments is that court fees is treated as a fee and not a tax. The basis of computation of court fee is the same, save for a few inconsequential variations. And therefore, concepts like market value, declaration, partition, nature of relief sought, duty of court are all the same. And judgments rendered in one state can be factually applicable, if factually applicable, be applied to a case in other states. Now we come to suits for declaration. In Karnataka, all suits for declaration, whether with or without consequential relief, except suits relating to validity of adoption or invalidity of adoption, are chargeable to court fee under Section 24. Once the property comes within the corporation limit, the Land Revenue Act ceases to apply, irrespective of whether the lands are converted for non-agricultural purposes or not. ILR 2005 Karnataka, page 60, ILR 2005 Karnataka, page 60. In Karnataka, the position about suits for declaratory decrees has been simplified. Section 24 makes no distinction between a case where a consequential relief is claimed and a case where no consequential relief is claimed, except in the opening part of the section and subclause D. Now, what is the benefit? This dispenses with the need to scrutinize whether in a particular case a relief is consequential or not. Subsection D of Section 24 does away with the distinction of a case where the subject matter of the suit is capable of valuation and a case where subject matter of the suit is not capable of valuation. Section 24D covers all cases of declaration not covered by A and B. Subsection C was omitted in Karnataka with effect from 1/4/1982. Now it has been held that while section 24A and B deal with tangible rights, 24D deals with intangible rights. Now in a suit for declaration of the lentil rights of a plaintiff who is in possession, it was held to be a suit for specific performance falling under a different provision of the Act. Now this section 39 of the Karnataka Court Fees Act corresponds to section 41C of the Madras Court Fees Act as against the landlord, and for declaration under D as against the second defendant, who in the decided case was a stranger. This was the decision of the Madras High Court reported in 1967, Volume 2, Madras Law Journal 536. 1967, 2 Madras Law Journal 536. Section 24 of the Karnataka Act dispenses with the need to consider nice questions that often arose under the 1870 Act as to whether in a particular case the subject matter was capable of valuation or not, where the suit schedule property is not divided and the undivided property is described in the schedule, and the plaintiff seeks to declare the sale of his undivided share as null and void. Court fee is payable on the entire sale deed for the simple reason that the sale deed cannot be declared null and void piecemeal. This was the view taken by the Karnataka High Court in 2010, Volume 5, Karnataka Law Journal 395. 2010, Volume 5, Karnataka Law Journal 395. Now, Section 24D is in the nature of a general provision. If the substance of the relief sought for in the suit falls under a particular provision, it cannot be brought under a general provision of 24D. This judgment I found in Manu KA 0378-2000. Manu KA 0378-2000. Now, the proviso to Section 34 of the Specific Relief Act prohibits the grant of declaration where the plaintiff, being able to seek further relief than a mere declaration of title, omits to do so. Thus, where the defendant is in possession of the suit property, the plaintiff cannot merely ask for declaration, but he must also sue for possession. This was in 20 Madras Law Journal 301 at pages 304 and 305. A suit for declaration that a decree is null and void is in effect a suit for cancellation of a decree and falls under Section 38 of the Karnataka Act, which deals with cancellation of documents and decrees, and not Section 24. ILR 1998, Volume 2, Karnataka 1962. A suit for declaration that the nomination of an insurance policy is void and for injunction is actually a suit for cancellation of a policy, creating a right to receive money, and court fee is payable on the value of the insurance policy. 1981, second volume, Karnataka Law Journal 262. 1981, second volume, Karnataka Law Journal 262. A decree for declaration of title for money or other property is not a decree for money or for other property, but for a decree for recovery of money or other property. This is because a decree in invitum is not an instrument securing money or other property, but is a record of the formal adjudication of a court relating to a right claim. This is the proposition of law laid down by the Supreme Court in state of Uttar Pradesh versus Ramakrishnan Burman, AR 1971 Supreme Court 87. AR 1971 Supreme Court 87. A suit for declaration that the plaintiff is not in arrears of tax and for permanent injunction restraining the defendants from demanding and recovering tax is a suit which will be covered by 24T of the Karnataka Act. This is the general provision. 1987, Volume 2, Karnataka Law Journal, 238. Now, a sales certificate issued by a cooperative society under the Cooperative Societies Act is not a document of title. It creates no more than statutory evidence of transfer. Thus, when an auction purchaser files a suit to recover the sale consideration paid by him in a sale held under the Cooperative Society Act, for the reason that the judgment debtor had no saleable interest in the property, the claim would fall under 24D, general provision. 1971, 1 Madras Law Journal, 24. Now, we have a little different thing. An order under section 125 of the Code of Criminal Procedure does not place the property in custodia legis, and the unsuccessful party must sue for possession and not mere declaration. An order under 125 does not necessarily have the effect of actual dispossession of the unsuccessful party. But where an order is passed under 146, a suit for declaration would be maintainable. AR 1925 Madras 427. I am citing this because this also implies payment of court fee. Though the order was passed under 125 or 146, what is the relief? What is the court fee? Now, rule of the thumb, where vested rights are sought to be divested, it should be treated as being in the nature of a declaratory suit. Where vested rights are sought to be divested, it should be treated as being in the nature of a declaratory suit. Now, next we have the concept of substantial relief and consequential relief is found across the board in all states. A consequential relief means a substantial relief in accordance with the title which is sought to be declared. It is only when a relief can be granted without a declaration, then it is, now what supposing we call relief B as a consequential relief. If that relief can be granted without first granting the relief of declaration, then it is not a consequential relief. In understanding the concept of consequential relief, actually it would be useful to refer to certain cases decided under the Court Fees Act of 1870. I'll give you 4 judgments which appear to be useful to understand the concept of consequential relief as opposed to substantial relief. ILR 1942 Lahore 179, ILR 1942 Lahore 179, AR 1937 Nagpur 14, AR 1937 Nagpur 14, AR 1928 Calcutta 55, AR 1928 Calcutta 55, AR 1949 Madras 778, AR 1949 Madras 778. If you see, I have Lahore on the west side, coming to Calcutta on the east, central India, Nagpur, and right down to the south, Madras. The understanding of the concept of consequential relief is the same. Now, the Punjab High Court held that where the plaintiff sought a declaratory relief, that the lease was inoperative, and consequential relief of injunction, restraining the defendants from interfering with the plaintiff's lease rights, court fee should be paid on the lease rights and not on the market value of the property. AR 1956 Punjab 251. Now, take a case where the plaintiff has not stated any value and has paid court fee under a misapprehension of law. He honestly did not know, he made some calculation, he filed court. He can at any stage of the suit be permitted to state his value and pay the fee. He cannot be asked to pay ad valorem fee on the value stated for jurisdiction. Like I said, there's a value for court fee, value for jurisdiction. He makes a mistake regarding computation of court fee. He can always bring it to the notice of court and say, listen, under a misapprehension, I made this. This is the value for the purpose of court fee and permit me to pay. The court cannot say, no, I won't accept this value now. You have to pay on the value of the property for the purpose of jurisdiction. This was the law laid down in 1958 Supreme Court 245. AR 1958 Supreme Court 245. Now, where a defendant is the appellant, it seems doubtful whether he can be permitted to seek amendment to amend the plaint valuation, because the plaintiff makes the valuation. In Karnataka, under section 49, court fee payable in the trial court is payable in the appellate court. It is doubtful whether the defendant who comes in appeal can be permitted to amend the plaint valuation and pay court fee. Maybe he can ask the court to give directions to the plaintiff to state his value even at the appellate stage. Now, if this is not permitted, he would have to pay ad valorem fee on the value stated by the plaintiff for the purposes of jurisdiction. But this rule appears to apply only where notional valuation is stated under section 24D. Where section 24A or B applies, that is market value, half the market value applies, the appellant may value the appeal on a correct basis, though the suit was valued on a wrong basis in the trial court and a higher fee was paid on it. Now, in Pondicherry, Union Territory, in a suit for declaration in Pondicherry, now known as Puducherry, Section 25 of the Puducherry Court Fees and Suits Valuation Act 1972 provides for payment of court fee computed on the market value, and where the plaintiff is in possession, where the relief sought for declaration injunction, fee is computed on one half the market value, and where it is intellectual property, value given by the plaintiff or rupees 500, and in any other case, rupees 400. This is also the law in Karnataka. Figures are different. In Karnataka, the minimum valuation is kept as 1,000 and 25 rupees court fee. Other states, like I said, it's only multiple small variations in amount. Next, we come to the second last item on the agenda, that is suits for cancellation of decrees or documents. In Karnataka, section 38 of the Karnataka Court Fees and Suits Valuation Act deals with cancellation. The word cancellation implies that the person suing should be a party to the document or decree. Strangers are not bound by the document or decree and are not obliged to seek for cancellation. This is the law laid down by the Madras and the Rajasthan High Courts, AR 1956 Madras 179, AR 1956 Madras 179, AR 1978 Rajasthan 123, AR 1978 Rajasthan 123. Though these judgments are given by the Madras and Rajasthan High Courts, they are applicable in Karnataka. The Madras High Court held that in case a person is not a party to a decree or document, they can ignore the document and ask for appropriate relief and pay court fee without asking for cancellation. AR 1947 Madras 130. AR 1947 Madras 130. There are many more judgments. I really don't have the time to get into that. A plaintiff suing for his proper share in the family properties on the footing that a previous compromise and a release deed executed by his father are not binding need not pay court fee for cancellation because the plaintiff was not eo nominee, a party to the compromise. He was not eo nominee, a party to the compromise. The term eo nominee is in Latin and means under the name, in that name, or in that character. Now, the Allahabad High Court considered a case filed by an idol, claiming that the property given to it had been sold to the defendants and the relief sought in the plaint was possession of the property. The court held that it was not necessary for the sale deed to be adjudged void, as the idol was not eo nominee, a party to the sale deed. Idol was not eo nominee, a party to the sale deed. Chief Inspector of Stamps versus Shri Gopalji Maharaj, AR 1950 Allahabad 231. AR 1950 Allahabad 231. Now the word value is also used. The value has been judicially interpreted. The Supreme Court, while considering the meaning of value found in section 40 subsection 1 of the Kerala Court Fees Act, held that it does not mean the market value, but the value shown in the document. AR 2010 SCW 3754. AR 2010 SCW 3754. Now it appears that where a person is a party to a document and he attacks it, he has to pay a court fee on the value shown in the document. But if he is not a party to the document, the relief would be covered as if it were not capable of being valid. If he is not a party, the relief would be covered as if it were not capable of being valued. Sukhreed Singh versus Randir Singh, AR 2010 Supreme Court, 2807. 2010 Supreme Court, 2807. Now please see that under section 38 of the Karnataka Act, the word used is value and not market value as used in other provisions. And therefore it follows that the value shown in the document is one which needs to be taken into consideration for computing court fee. Court fees act as a fiscal act. It has to be strictly construed. The omission of the word market means that the legislature intended something else. AR 2013 Karnataka 159 would be a useful decision. Now in a suit for declaration of title with a further declaration that the sale deed was not binding on the plaintiff, court fee has to be paid on the market value of the property and not on the consideration shown in the sale deed. If you remember earlier I said where two reliefs are sought, you pay on the higher relief. ILR 2010 Karnataka 2288. Where the allegation of the plaintiff was that fraudulent misrepresentation was not only as to contents of the document, but also as to its character. Means she said, listen, I was defrauded into signing this paper. I was also defrauded as to the contents of the document. She was merely seeking a declaration that the sale deed, which she never executed and to which she was not a party, was void. Where she says misrepresentation not only as to content but also as to character means that she did not execute the sale deed and she was not a party. In such a case, the Madhya Pradesh High Court held that it was not necessary for her to seek relief of setting aside the sale deed. AR 1977 Madhya Pradesh 118. However, the Calcutta High Court seems to have taken a different view. According to the Calcutta High Court, the interpretation term executed in the Registration Act, where under section 75, the registering authority may refuse to register a document only if the signature or mark on the document is not proved to be that of the person who is said to have made it. It is not for the registering authority to consider whether the signature was obtained by coercion or there was signature on blank paper. Please see this judgment, 1950 SCC Online Calcutta 199. 1950 SCC Online Calcutta 199. As lawyers, both the judgments could be made use by one side or the other. Where a person not being a party to a decree files a suit for declaration that a decree is not binding on him, it is not a suit for cancellation of a decree, but a suit for a declaration. The question is as to what is the real nature of the plaint shorn of all its verbiage. But in applying these principles, we also should take care, the court should take care not to import anything to the plaint which it does not really contain, either actually or by necessary implication. A relief not asked for cannot be imported into a plaint so as to charge court fee. In approaching the question of court fee, distinction should be drawn between decrees or documents which are totally void and those which are voidable on account of fraud, mistake, undue influence. The importance of this distinction lies in the fact that so far as wholly void decrees or documents are concerned, they don't require to be set aside as they have no existence, and only a finding of fact is necessary to give the plaintiffs the necessary relief. Now, in the case of voidable decrees or documents, on the other hand, it is necessary to have them set aside before the relief claimed by the plaintiff can be granted. In the latter category, the court has to make a declaration in the true sense, and therefore the true nature of the relief is that of declaration and consequential relief. Now, another type of case. Documents executed by the plaintiff's predecessor in interest stand on the same footing as a document executed by the plaintiff himself. The essential relationship between a mortgagee and a mortgagor on a simple mortgage is that of creditor and debtor. It cannot be said that the mortgagee, for all purposes, is a successor or representative interest of the mortgagor. So this is an interesting legal argument raised by a lawyer, possibly a very sharp mind, in the Madras High Court, which was rejected. 1945, second volume, Madras Law Journal, 582. 1945, second volume, Madras Law Journal, 582. Now, in the case of trustees, the predecessors in interest would be the predecessors in office. This has been held by the Allahabad High Court, AR 1949, Allahabad 347. AR 1949, Allahabad 347. Now we'll consider in brief void documents and decrees, sham and nominal documents, and documents which have been subsequently rendered ineffective. A document executed by a person who is a minor or a person who is of unsound mind is void ab initio, and a suit for declaration that it is void does not involve cancellation of the document. 1955, 1 Madras Law Journal, 310. 1955, 1 Madras Law Journal, 310. A decree obtained against a dead person is a nullity and need not be set aside by his legal representative. This is based on the principle that the transaction which is void ab initio must be deemed to have never taken place at all. Though the distinction between a decree to which a plaintiff is a party and a decree to which he is not, and the distinction between void and voidable decrees may be relevant in other branches of law, as far as court fee is concerned, a suit by a party to a decree which is ex facie regular and within the jurisdiction of the court, to have it declared as void against him is brought within the category of suits for cancellation. If a decree is ex facie regular and the court had jurisdiction, if I want to set it aside, you have to sue for cancellation. AR 1949 Madras 746. AR 1949 Madras 746. Where the plaintiff's case is that the document is a sham, it is nominal, it need not be set aside, and the suit for relief on that footing is not one for cancellation. AR 1962 Madras 396. AR 1962 Madras 396. But where some plaintiff comes and says it's a sham and nominal document not binding on me, during the course of trial it is found that the plaintiff's allegations are false and the document is voidable but not void, the suit may fail as the plaintiff has not paid court fee for cancellation. Where on the allegations in the plaint it is clear that the documents were operative documents and not sham or nominal and were acted upon subsequently, the substance of the suit is one for cancellation, and this cannot be concealed by using the words sham or nominal. Even if a plaintiff attacks a document as sham or nominal but seeks cancellation, he has to pay appropriate court fee. The words purports or operates to create in section 86, as is found in some other court fees acts, makes this position clear. This principle also applies to cases where the plaintiff pleads that though the document is originally good, the defendant has subsequent to the execution of the document disclaimed any interest under it. The decision of the Madras High Court in AR 1936 Madras 344 that a suit for return of a promissory note on the ground of discharge is one for cancellation. This I personally submit and respectfully submitted does not appear to be good law. AR 1936 Madras 344 does not appear to be good law. We now come to a case where the document sought to be awarded was executed by the plaintiff's guardian during his minority. A full bench of the Madras High Court in AR 1940 Madras 113, AR 1940 Madras 113 held that if a person not having authority to execute a deed does so, it is not necessary for persons who are bound by it to sue to set aside that document, for it cannot be used against them. They may treat it as non-existent and sue for the right as if it did not exist. But there seems to be a divergence of opinion in another edition of the Madras High Court, also a full bench judgment, in AR 1956 Madras 670. So I think it would be useful to read both AR 1940 Madras 113 full bench and AR 1956 Madras 670 full bench and take your own decisions. Now we come to the final part of this rather long lecture. We now come to partition suits. There is really no difference, for example, between court fees payable in Karnataka and court fee payable, say, in Pondicherry for partition suits. In Karnataka, in a suit for partition, where the plaintiff alleges in the plaint that he or she is in actual possession, constructive possession, joint possession, fixed court fee of rupees 200 is payable under section 35(2). However, if the person seeking partition has been excluded, court fee is on the market value. Since in a partition suit, every plaintiff is a defendant and every defendant is a plaintiff, as each one of them asserts their own independent right, defendant himself can claim partition in the written statement and is paying a court fee computed at half the rate specified for the plaintiff. In Pondicherry 2, section 37 of the act in force there reads similar to the one in Karnataka. In Gujarat, it appears, please check it out, that the fee has to be paid on the value of the share and where the property is paying land revenue on the legal fictional value of such share. Madhya Pradesh too appears to be on similar lines with Gujarat. In a suit for partition and separate possession, the value for purpose of jurisdiction is the value of the share claimed and not the value of the entire property. AR 1959 Madras 184. I'm sorry, AR 1959 Mysore 184. AR 1959 Mysore 184. A suit for partition and for declaration that the sale transaction in respect of those properties was not binding on the plaintiff, the court held that if the plaintiff had been able to demonstrate that what the plaintiff was seeking partition of unconverted agricultural land, he would be liable to pay court fee as though it was agricultural land. Manu, Karnataka 1744, 2016. Manu, Karnataka 1744, 2016. Partition is the only means of obtaining effective possession of the plaintiff's share. The general rule is that possession of one co-owner is the possession of all co-owners, and the plaintiff must be deemed to be in joint possession, even if he were not in actual possession. Mere exclusion from enjoyment or receipt of income or even exclusive use of the property does not attract market value court fee, but only the nominal court fee prescribed under the various acts. This is the law laid down by the Kerala High Court, AR 1967 Kerala 176. Where the defendant seeks partition and separate possession of his share, the defendant's claim is neither a set-off nor a counterclaim, and consequently there is different treatment given in the Karnataka Act. Now, it should be kept in mind as to the rule of constructive possession, it has no application. Please, this is very, very crucial as lawyers. The rule of constructive possession has no application where it is alleged that prior to the date of the plaint, the defendant has claimed that he is in possession of the whole property and has denied the plaintiff's right. AR 1925 Madras 468 at page 469. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the second lecture of this series. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Yes, sir. I will see.
I can't hear you this way.
No. It was only.
Now I can hear you.
One is somebody says, please suggest a good book on the Court Fees Act. I'm just reminded of someone saying to ask the sun to tell who has the brightest sunshine. You could show your book first. This is by PCS Rao.
This is the book. The publisher is UR Publishers, Bangalore.
What can be done is that you can ask Parvati to share a screenshot. I will share it in the groups.
I will see that it's done. I'll tell Parvati. Yeah, will do.
Yeah.
Now,
this is by Gayatri. What does the ad valorem court fees mean?
Ad valorem court fee means that once you arrive at a value, then a percentage of that value has to be paid to the government as court fee. Ad valorem means a percentage of something. It's not a fixed court. Supposing I have a claim of 10,000 rupees and I say ad valorem court fee 10%, it means 10% of 10,000. So that is the meaning of ad valorem. It's a percentage of a particular value.
Yeah. I'm just seeing if we have any other question. Because of the group, we don't have. So what according to you should be, besides listening to this, would be a best way forward to understand this vast aspects? Now this is what is the court fees for seeking a person legal death?
That would be a declaration. Now in Karnataka, that would be a declaration which does not have any monetary value. It would be under 24D. In Karnataka, it would be 1,000 rupees. I think in Pondicherry, it is slightly different. It's only a matter, all these sort of cases do not have any value. Declare that a person is dead, doesn't have a value. It would have to be only a notional value. In Karnataka, that notional value is fixed as 1,000. In other states, they say you can fix whatever value you want, or they fix some value. Basically, the principle is the same. The monetary figures are slightly different because it's a state subject. Then somebody had asked a question saying that what happens if you don't pay court fee? If I file a suit, court fee, I don't pay full court fee. The court finds out I've not paid court fee. The court will direct me to pay court fee within a particular time. If I don't pay court fee within a particular time, the court will reject the plaint. One, the court cannot pass a decree to collect court fee. It will reject the plaint. Now, rejection of the plaint, I can either file a separate suit, a fresh suit. I can file a fresh suit where I rectify the defect. That is, in the fresh, before I file a fresh suit, I should pay the court fee as per the order of the court which rejected the plaint. And on the same cause of action, file a fresh suit. You can see that in the explanation there. So there is no question of the court taking any action. Now, supposing there is a person who files a suit, he loses the suit. Now he knows where he stands. And if he is fairly smart, he won't file an appeal. Court fee is lost forever. There is no provision by which the court fee, and the court passes a decree, it can't say pay court fee, it has no jurisdiction. Court dismisses the suit, it has become functus officio. So if a person who does something, somehow manages to get a decree without payment of court fee, he cannot, and he doesn't file an appeal, that court fee is lost. However, if the appeal is filed, unless that the High Court or where the appellate court stops it there and say, boss, pay court fee first. What you had to pay there plus what you have to pay in appeal, in all probability that also might go. It's something which every lawyer has to see how the, in here section 11 in Karnataka, it may be some other section in thing, but the across the board, the principle of law is the same. The court cannot ask for court fee in the decree. It has to collect it before it disposes of the suit, or it loses the court fee unless the man makes a mistake of filing an appeal where he gets stuck again with another court, because an appeal is a continuation of the suit.
This is Sri Kantaveshwar. In a partition suit, the plaintiff claiming one share pays a fixed court fee of rupees 200. Then if there is one defendant, does the defendant have to pay the court fees for his share?
If the defendant wants a decree in his favor, plaintiff can ask, if the defendant wants a decree in his favor, he has to pay the same court. It's half the court fee is the plaintiff pays, and you pay the court fee. The court will say plaintiff has got half share. Both will get decreased because both of them are plaintiffs and both of them are defendants. Each is asserting their own right.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, we don't have the questions. Before we part for the day, tomorrow we would be having a session which of late has picked up very amongst all youngsters, especially. Right to know vis-a-vis right to forget. This is by Mr. Sajan Poya, a senior advocate from Supreme Court of India. Do stay connected with us tomorrow at 4 p.m. Everyone stay safe, stay blessed. And before we part for the day, as they say, we have crossed the 50% journey because there are four parts. We have done 2. And the 2 sessions have been quite insightful. And in January, we log in for the 2 webinars on the part 2 of part 3 and part 4. As they say that as you start enjoying the thrillers and anything good, you tend to wait for the sequels in a more anxiety to know where what is actually lagging behind and what we can look for. So for those 2 webinars, we will connect with Mr. Subramaniam Srivastava on the sessions. And for other topics, we are always would be requesting him to give his insights. But insofar as these part 3 and part 4 are concerned, we will connect in January with Mr. Subramaniam. Everyone stay safe, stay blessed. And thank you, sir, once again for giving the insightful session, though it was vast. If the book, you wouldn't have written the book, I don't think that we could have assimilated all these thought processes in 4 webinars. We see that it was a blissful bliss for us that you wrote that book.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. And thank you, my colleagues, wherever you are in India. Thank you for joining me. I hope I've been of some help. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, sir. Thank you.